Good morning and a big welcome to everybody to this, our final edition of Cartesian Talks for the year. And who would have thought when Anthony had this idea earlier in the year during lockdown that we would end up here. But it's been fantastic over the last couple of months to get some insights from Anthea and her fabulous guests. It's been phenomenal to see the comments that we've gotten from everybody who joins the webinars and everybody who gets to listen to them afterwards. And so a big thank you, Anthea, for putting this together and for spoiling us with the kind of people and friends and guests that you've invited. And this morning is no exception. We're joined by somebody who is a magnificent, and I use that word intentionally, leader in a South African context, former Deputy Governor of our Reserve Bank, current CEO of ABSA, Daniel Mnele, and he is just somebody that is so well known, and we're delighted that he has managed to fit us into his schedule. Anthea is very keen that this morning really is a conversation. We're going to look at a couple of themes: banking sector, leadership, economy broadly. We welcome your questions, so put those for us in the Q&A. And this is going to be, I think, the easiest and best way to earn some CPD points, Anthea. And before we get started with the conversation, how have markets been treating Cartesian, and how are you guys doing?
Good morning, Carl. Thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction. Yeah, markets are okay. You know, there's always this kind of dichotomy between markets and the real economy, and I do actually want to speak to Daniel a bit about it today. Almost kind of, I think South African market is being led by global markets predominantly, and so you've seen this huge spike or this return to levels that we saw pre-COVID, and it's interesting to kind of watch carefully what is happening. And a lot of my clients are actually taking money offshore. And yet as analysts and fund managers, we're having discussions about where we see value in South Africa. So yeah, definitely almost another webinar, quite frankly. But I'd like to welcome Daniel. Daniel, I've known Daniel for a while now, so thank you so much for your time. I know you're an incredibly busy man. It happens when you manage 38,000 people. And we've only got an hour, so if you don't mind, I'm going to jump straight into it. As Carl said, I want to touch on the economy, I want to touch on the banking sector, what's happening at ABSA, what you're seeing, and maybe even a little bit about leadership, putting you on the spot there. So we all know that the South African economy is really struggling. Our employment rate is just too scary to mention. Crime feels like it's on the increase again, and I can go on and on and on. And then on the one hand, I feel like we should be working together, every South African pulling their weight. But it feels to me like every day there's less and less cohesion in our society. Everyone blames everyone else. No one takes responsibility. And of course, the politicians are an easy target. Daniel, here's a strange question for you. If you were, and heaven forbid, if you were running this country, what would be your main focus to get the economy back on track?
Cynthia, good morning, and thanks very much for inviting me to be part of this Cartesian Talks. I've heard a lot about them, so great opportunity to participate in the conversation. Look, yeah, sounds like an easy question. It's not an easy one, but I suppose the key issue for me would be, and it's been said by many people, that the cheapest form of stimulus is confidence. So we need to start by making sure that we shore up confidence, and that we make sure that there is policy certainty, that we implement the kind of structural reform that needs to be enacted, that are acting to free up the economy. We need to make sure that there is implementation of the various plans that we've put in place, because our problem doesn't quite seem to be the what. It's more about the how and the when. So it's putting more emphasis on implementing the various plans that we have. So that diagnosis around what needs to be done, I think it's pretty clear. And you touched on collaboration, which is very, very important. We need to capitalize on what we have seen, certainly during this year in particular, brought upon by the significant challenges, of course, that COVID has put on us, we've seen a much, much stronger level of cooperation between government and the public sector in general, the private sector, civil society, in how we confronted this pandemic. And that's certainly something going forward to capitalize on in terms of making sure that we work together to make sure that this economy comes back again.
Sure. So Bill Clinton's strategist, and I forget his name, I want to say Carvel or Carvelli or something like that, but he famously said, it's the economy, stupid. You know, this is when he was talking to the staffers, trying to send the message. He also said, change versus more of the same, and don't forget healthcare. And kind of when I look at what government's doing, they're focusing on infrastructure, and it really feels like people are buying this infrastructure story. You know, we're going to focus on infrastructure. We're going to put money into it. Private equity companies are going to be invested in infrastructure. And this kind of view of politics versus the economy, I always feel that there are so many of us saying, can we trust government to deliver? You know, we've seen so many economic reform papers. I don't know what version we're on and what we're even calling it anymore. But how does government go about implementing when we don't have money? South Africa, our coffers are bare.
Look, one of the opportunities there is, again, comes back to collaboration, particularly with regard to infrastructure, is asking for help, is crowding in the private sector more, looking at how one can push public-private partnerships and make sure that in that process, lots of private capital can get released to invest. And so that certainly we have infrastructure needs, and it's important to increase the productive capacity of the economy. And again, that is going to be an underpinning for growth. So the infrastructure drive is a correct one, but it's important that that gets taken through and implemented relentlessly, with focus on those sectors and those areas of the economy that will help us free up the economy. For instance, issues such as spectrum, telecommunications, all these things that would play to where the growth pockets are going to be in the new normal, in the new economy that we're looking at.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I get where you're going with that. So Daniel, at your last trading update, ABSA's last trading update, retail banking business loans grew 3%. Your credit loss ratio for the 9 months improved to 219 basis points from the first half, 277 basis points. So as a money manager, it feels, or as an analyst and a money manager, it feels to me like I've overestimated the negative impact that COVID has had or is having on the economy. So, because I feel like, things are not that as bad as I thought. And then on the other hand, I kind of feel like, the fallout is still coming. What are you seeing? What trends are you seeing kind of in the financial sector at the moment?
Look, with regards to the financial sector, and I guess the economic recovery overall, because we just sort of, in many ways, a mirror image of that. We're certainly seeing the economy recovering somewhat stronger than maybe most of us had anticipated. And you would have seen, and not just ABSA, but various people that put out forecasts, sort of pairing them off a little bit in terms of the level of contraction, for instance, that they're expecting for this year. But certainly what we've seen in the third quarter, which the trading update we issued referred to, was a much stronger recovery, I think, than we've anticipated. But with all of that, there remains high levels of uncertainty. There is high forecast risk. So it is too early to call whether we've kind of got behind this. But certainly, if you look at the credit loss ratio that you talked about, in terms of just the third quarter, for us it was just above 100, which is just a little bit around the top end of our through the cycle range. And so at the time that we put in the coverage and the defenses and raised those impairments, things were very, very uncertain. They continue to be uncertain. And a lot of it had to do with our judgment of how we thought things would unfold. And only time will tell whether we actually made the right calls or not. But certainly what we're seeing as the 9 months up until now is that we are likely to see a much better a second half, and some of the more recent activity, both in terms of what we see, in terms of official statistics, certainly seem to suggest that we are not going to see a second half that is nearly as bad as the first half, of course, influenced mostly by that severe lockdown in the second quarter.
So Daniel, I know you don't have a crystal ball, because if you did, we wouldn't be sitting opposite each other at the moment. But how do you, in this kind of once in a generation event such as COVID-19, how are you thinking about balancing risk versus growth? How much risk are you prepared to take to continue injecting growth into the business?
Look, you will be aware that when this crisis struck, ABSA was in the process of implementing a very ambitious growth strategy, which was starting to show results. We had actually a fairly respectable first quarter, but with the severity of this crisis and its severe magnitude, we obviously had to put in some defenses and temporarily pivot away from that to preserving capital, to making sure we've got appropriate liquidity buffers, that our costs are managed properly in dealing with this crisis. And as I said, it's still uncertain how things will unfold. We are obviously in a fortunate position that there seems to be this hope around a vaccine becoming available. At least we're getting to a point where potentially, once all the emergency applications and approvals have been received, and there's a sense of how quickly this vaccine can be produced and distributed, we're getting to a point where at least we might be able to see the bottom of how things are going to get stabilized. But it is important in this environment as well, while you're managing the risks of today and the now, to also start thinking, what is it that's going to make us successful post-COVID? How do we respond to the various changes that have been brought upon our operating environment as a result of COVID? How do we tune into the changing behavioral patterns of our customers? How do we play to the change preferences around products that they need, distribution channels? So that is work that is ongoing to say, look, in all of this, there is opportunity that sits, of course, mostly in the digital space, making sure you've got the capabilities there, that your people are trained, and that you can deliver to your customer the kind of products that suit their changing preferences and their changing environments.
So Daniel, a little bit more of a personal question on the same theme. Actually, I met you, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago when I came back to South Africa, and then you were the regulator. Now you're the regulated. Does that help you at all? Has it helped you at all, having been on the other side of the equation, to manage the risk and to manage a bank, and especially in this crazy environment we find ourselves in?
Look, Cynthia, I mean, what we're faced in here is once in a 100-year event. There are no benchmarks, there were no blueprints of how you manage it. You just hope that some of the lessons you've learned along the way, and certainly being in the central bank, you do have times where you need to deal with crises and manage crises and observe how others are managing crises. If I think back to the 2008 and 9 crisis, so some of that, one sort of instinctively almost and subconsciously would have drawn upon those experiences in guiding your decision in the management of a crisis such as this. But the one thing, though, I need to highlight is that whilst I worked for the regulator, I certainly wouldn't describe myself as having been a regulator. I was mostly involved with the financial market side and with the international relations work at the bank. So for my part, I was actually mostly involved with the financial markets, with institutional investors, and not really tightly as a sort of fully fledged regulator as such. So I was more the bank in the Reserve Bank.
Okay, all those caveats, my goodness, Daniel. Let's get personal a bit now, because as you said, kind of you moved from being in financial markets or at the Reserve Bank. Now you're the CEO of ABSA. And can I say, before I continue, I was not expecting this, but when I put out this podcast, you agreed it and I advertised it to kind of Cartesian's clients and to friends and family. Many of them, well, not many, a few of them work at ABSA. And I couldn't believe this. I had calls from people at ABSA or messages going, oh, wow, that's amazing. You know, Daniel really has done a fantastic job in his, what is it now, 9-10 months that you've been there. How does it feel? How are you feeling about it? Do you have any tips for me as a business owner and as a leader of people? What are we looking at? We'll take any tips, Daniel.
No, look, that's very generous and very kind, the comments that you're making, but I would certainly wouldn't want to book any victories for myself. But I must say that we had a good run as the bank. We obviously made sure that first and foremost, we kept our colleagues healthy and safe, and made sure that we continued to be there for our clients, to make sure that whether it's advisory, whether it's transactional and execution services, that we're there for them. And we're also given, obviously, a unique opportunity to show up as a responsible corporate citizen by making sure that whether it's screening and testing, or whether it's PPEs or food parcels, that we could be there for the communities in which we operate. But I have been really proud of the 38,000 plus of our colleagues who really delivered on the corporate purpose of bringing possibility to life. And it's really due to them in terms of how we managed to migrate fairly seamlessly into remote working arrangement, how operationally and financially we kept the organization stable and resilient. So it's certainly nice to get that feedback, but I wouldn't want to claim it all for myself, certainly not.
Thanks, Daniel. I'm going to jump in here if I may, Anthea, because I'm having a couple of social media questions and comments that people are asking about. And one of them relates to the banking sector generally, Daniel, and your thoughts about opportunities for investors, retail investors, first-time investors that we've got on this webinar, the kind of opportunities that are available in the sector, and your views a little bit on that, please.
Let me just make sure I understand your question correctly. Opportunities for investors?
Yeah, absolutely. So is the banking sector, do we see, more growth opportunities in 2021? Yeah, your thoughts around that.
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously the banking sector, as you would know, is so inextricably interwoven with the economic activity. So certainly I would think, given where we are and the need to recover, there will be opportunities in the banking sector. If you look at valuations, and where earlier in the year, given the severity of the crisis, and as I say, our linkages with the economy and how employment prospects and issues around strain that our customers and businesses and individuals would face, you could see investors taking a little bit of a cautious approach, and there was a significant sell-off. But certainly if you look at the last 3 months or so, things are coming back rather strongly. And I think as and when the economy recovers, people probably stand a good chance of getting the right returns in the banking sector. So yeah, it may well be good levels to re-establish positions and entry levels that maybe previously may not have presented themselves in the manner that they do now. But certainly from what we've been seeing lately, the response to what we expect in terms of economic recovery going forward seems to be sort of showing up in bank valuations.
Thank you for that.
If I may.
Yeah, go for it, Anthea.
So just about a week and a half ago, I looked at the bank's price to book value, and it just, the banking sector looks ridiculously cheap. And so people have been asking me, if I'm going to be invested in South Africa, where would I be invested? And in fact, I'm a bit more worried and a bit more nervous about the retail sector. But honestly, if I'm looking at sectors as a whole, I would say the banking sector in South Africa really is just it really is a solid sector, and there's so many good value plays at the moment. You know, First Rand perhaps looks a bit expensive on a 1 point, I want to say 65, but I must, I've got so many numbers in my head. ABSA is below 1 times price to book value, so there's absolutely no reason not to be buying these banking shares if you are investing.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I would agree with that, and I think yeah, certainly if you want me to recommend, I might have a name for you.
And Daniel, have you been surprised? I mean, the doomsayers, when rating agencies come out with ratings, often predict the end of the world and the end of our economy. But investors have been resilient despite the rating agencies.
Yeah, I mean, Cynthia touched on parts of it earlier with regards to the international environment and the global picture. Obviously, we're a small and open economy that hangs on that, and certainly the backstop that has been provided by fiscal authority, by monetary policy authorities in combating this crisis. Huge amounts of liquidity that have been put into the system. They are needing to find a home, and as you said, you have seen lots of that liquidity going into the financial economy, and people have sort of taken advantage of this. And so, yeah, overall, the picture has been fairly resilient. You're right.
Another personal question for you, as before I hand over to Anthea. You're clearly a modest leader, but you've received an international award, well, many awards, but one that I was really interested in is from the German government, which is an award, the highest award that they give to an individual for service. And why I mention that is maybe you could talk a little bit about servant leadership and your view about getting more people in our country involved in contributing to a broader good, and what ABSA does around that.
Look, thanks for that. I think leadership is critically important, and of course, when you have to lead in a crisis, that's when really it all comes out, and it's extremely important, I think, to rally around a purpose. It's important to make sure that in an organization, people understand what the purpose of that organization is, that you are at all times purpose-led. And I must say, when we look at 2020 here, I sincerely hope that COVID-19 won't be all that defines what 2020 was for us, because in many ways, certainly that's what we saw at ABSA. That's been a year that gave us a platform to involve fully into a purpose-led organization, and a year that kind of has brought us a little bit closer to things that we deeply care about, both as individuals and I suppose as businesses, as a country. But it's critically important in this environment for leaders to continue to be visible, even through electronic means, to talk to colleagues, to make sure that you create an environment that is conducive to people feeling that they're respected, they're cared for, that what they do actually matter, that they actually are value adding in what they do, that there's a purpose to their work. And of course, that in the process, people experience growth, both from a professional and a personal perspective. But critical to all of that is, as leaders, we just listen a lot more than you talk.
Yeah, thanks for that. Daniel, just before I hand over to Anthea again, ABSA is not just a role player within South Africa, but the broader continent. Maybe you want to share some thoughts about Africa and opportunities, and whether you still see that as a focus for you at ABSA?
Yeah, certainly. One of the issues actually that attracted me to ABSA was this Pan-African ambition. for the bank, aspiring to be a fully fledged Pan-African organization that is invested in sustainable growth and development on the continent, with diverse staff that sort of constantly, produce quality products to our clients and all of that. So certainly the opportunities are there. As you know, we already have something like 26% of our revenue coming from the continent. And some of the projects that we've been involved in through this very successful separation project that we are just about to complete, from Barclays PLC, involved us investing in new systems and new technologies. So we see a great opportunities still on the continent. There's of course risk everywhere. We similarly, just like here, there are forecast risks. We need to figure out how we come out of the pandemic. As you know, there are fiscal challenges across many countries, and debt, government debt and public debt issues that need to be managed. But overall, the young population opportunities that come from things like how regional integration is going to move, for instance. As you know, one of the features of this pandemic has been what the economist calls globalization, that there won't be an end to globalization, but there will be a much more premium put on regional value chains that work in terms of what we've seen, the disruption coming through a global supply chain. So those kind of things that play directly into the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement and those kind of initiatives that are becoming a point to great opportunities for growth in the continent still. And as you know, we are active in 12 markets across the continent.
Yeah, which is very exciting.
Daniel, I'd like to explore that a little bit more, because I may not always have worked in South Africa or on the continent, but even when I was working for Morgan Stanley London, I was covering emerging markets. And this Africa Rising story always intrigues me, because I felt like it should have happened when I was in London 2008. Of course, we had the GFC then, but that's, we've had 12 years and we haven't done anything with it. And at the same time, I've also worked in the most northern and most southern capitals on the continent. And the fact that people refer to Africa as one country just intrigues me, because I've actually never seen more discrepancy in the way of doing things, in culture, and types of banking. So in Tunisia, for example, it's an Arab state. And so, we don't have the same economics or thought process about deposit taking, interest paying. There's a lot of difference. Where would you, you are the CEO of ABSA and you are kind of on the continent, so where would your focus areas be? I do think kind of French or Francophone Africa is very different to English or Zulu speaking or Arabic speaking Africa. It's just, I can't see Africa as one country.
No, it's absolutely correct, Cynthia, and that would be a great mistake to make, and that many make. We tend to refer to our engagement as kind of managing a portfolio of businesses across the continent with very different characteristics. If you take the current situation, for instance, you would have seen some of the countries that we're involved in that have got huge exposure to tourism and leisure, taking quite a hard beating on this, whereas others, you take countries like Ghana and Kenya when compared to the former category, which would be, Mauritius, Seychelles, Botswana, heavily involved in tourism and hotel sector and leisure and all that. So you then have that diversification that obviously helps you cushion some of the effects of the countries that are more severely affected vis-a-vis others that are holding up quite well. Of course, to be a truly Pan-African bank, you need a diverse footprint. You will know that we are mostly, given the history from Barclays, are involved in in Anglophone countries, with obviously the exception that we're in Ghana and we've got some operations in Nigeria, but we entered into a cooperation agreement with SocGen, with the French bank SocGen. And if you look at our combined footprint, that sort of gives us access to clients and markets in 27 countries. And those are the kind of issues that one needs to look at when looking at how you reap the benefits and take advantage of the opportunities on the continent, who you work with, what partnerships, and how you make those work and deliver for you. But the point that you make is that they're very diverse markets with diverse sort of infrastructures in terms of financial markets, legal infrastructures, regulatory frameworks. They're all at different stages of evolution, and one needs to understand that to be able to price risk appropriately. And one of the advantages that a bank like Absa has, for instance, is the deep roots and the long history that we've got in some of these countries with the right context. I mean, there are countries like Kenya where with the predecessor organization, we've been there for more than 100 years. And it's that deep understanding that allows you to be able to address the needs of the clients as they show up in the different parts of the continent.
So Daniel, neither of us are political analysts, but there is a question from Elma. She says, to me, it seems as if the ANC has never evolved from Liberation Party to government and is still struggling to divorce party from government. And this is holding back decision-making and growth. Should we be concerned about and also, different question, should we be concerned about the debate on a motion of no confidence on the president? And before you comment, I'd like to say that I've always known, and I think many people know, that the Party of Liberation is generally not the right party to rule. And I'm going to get slayed for this, absolutely. But it's kind of a very much a historical fact. And so to expect the ANC to go from the Party of Liberation to the Party of Economic Growth, I think it really is a hard ask, in my opinion. And then the flip side of that is we have to look at, do we have enough opposition political parties in the country to take it and to grow from there? I mean, I'm scared for you to ask you to comment on it, but feel free to say no if you want to, if you have a thought, perhaps.
Look, I certainly will not give you extensive comments on that because I am indeed not a political analyst as such, but I guess everybody knows that within the governing party, economic policy has tended to be contested terrain. And it is important that obviously consensus and unity of purpose be found so as to be able to direct the government appropriately. In terms of, motions of no confidence as such, that I wouldn't want to speculate on that, but I think the general expectation is that that motion would be defeated. But as I say, I wouldn't want to venture too much into the political debates.
And I think maybe, Anthony, if I can jump in, for me, what's interesting and ties in with some of the earlier conversation, it's whilst government, political parties play a massive role, I really like the term that Daniel used earlier in talking about the private sector, that insourcing, the crowd insourcing. And I think it's similar with individuals. We all have to step up to the plate, and whether we do something that's so small and so minuscule in our daily lives to make more opportunities for ourselves and others, we must do that. And South Africans have got a great track record of being good at that. So personally, I think that's a good opportunity.
Now, I fully agree with you. And if there's one trait as South Africans that we have, which came out of our history and our past, is that we do have that unique sort of quality of engaging in difficult conversations. Our problem is that we just tend to wait until it's really late and until we really are up against the wall with our backs, and then we do come out. But the issues that we talked about in terms of collaboration, extremely important. We need to not engage in blame games and finger pointing, because, Carl, there's no point in you and I sitting on the high sea and me pointing at you, telling you that, the boat is leaking from your side. Please do something about it, because we're both going to drown if I don't come to your rescue and talk to you and say, look, how do we collaborate? How do we sort of join forces to see that together we plug that hole and learn from that, how we then next time, if the hole is on my side, how we then again leverage those kind of skills to then plug the hole on this side. So the collaboration, the very difficult choices that we need to make in terms of issues such as how we deal with loss-making SOEs. Again, structural reforms are politically very, very challenging, but it requires very, very difficult choices. It requires trade-offs. Policy is always about trade-offs. And we need to accept that given where we are not going to make it to get this country to change, to move forward, to grow sustainably in a manner that's kind of painless for everybody. So somewhere we do need to take some pain, and it's got to be important that we understand what the longer term gain of some pain that we may need to take in the short term would be. But I certainly endorse the comments that you make.
And Anthea, it's one of the things I've also appreciated about you is being practical. We can all have theoretical, ideological conversations, but let's be practical. But now definitely a more controversial question than about the government, Daniel, and putting words into Anthea's mouth. Neither of us are big fans of cryptocurrency. I think I've warmed up a little bit more than Anthea. There are some that feel that cryptocurrency spells the end of big traditional banks. Do you and Absa have a view on cryptocurrencies and any words of wisdom for us?
Look, it's an evolving area, and it's been for a while. I obviously tracked that also from the time when I was at the Reserve Bank, and you will know the posture that was taken at the time in terms of generally sounding caution, and actually in central banking circles, people refer to those things as tokens. They don't even call them currency because they don't think they have the characteristics of being called currency. And obviously, if they're not backed by any legal system, by any regulatory system or supervisory kind of support that they have, it's important that people know as they engage in activities that involve cryptocurrencies, that they're aware of that. But certainly from where we are, we monitor the developments closely, and depending on where things go, we will then make a call as to whether that's a space in which, in a more decisive way, we might want to play or not. But that's probably too early a call to make. We're certainly following developments there, and we'll then obviously at the appropriate time have a clearer view of what that means for us and our business.
Thank you. Anthea, where are you at this? Are you telling your clients to buy lots of Bitcoin?
No, so Carol, I think you already know, like, my view on crypto is not that the cryptocurrency is worth investing, it's not that it's not worth investing in it, it's speculative, call it that. Let's say that the actual tokens or the currency is speculative, whereas the platform that these cryptocurrencies sit on, the ledger system, to me, is where the real money is, or where the future is for investment. So I want to be invested in companies that build the ledgers on which these systems, those are fantastic systems. And they're not just for running currency, they're for running all sorts of things from a financial kind of and supply chain perspective, in which case that makes a lot more sense to me. You know, the point with these currencies, or tokens as Daniel now calls them, is that one of them has to win almost for it to make sense, for the ideology of crypto to make sense. It feels like you can't have 17,000 of them, and there are so many of them. One of them has to be the future of currency, if you like, for it to work. Unless, of course, because then it just goes back to having different types of currencies, dollars, euros, what's the difference? Yen, rands, what's the difference if you've got, and I don't want to mention all the cryptocurrencies now, because I feel like that would be quite bad of me. But you know what I'm saying, right? So kind of one of them, and it's been fun, I must say, it's been fun to watch, like, some of the guys in the office even invested on something called Crypto Kitty. I was like, why are you doing it? Then basically they just said, well, we know we're going to lose our money, but it's a little bit of money. We're just going to watch the ride. We're there for the ride. So yeah,
I must agree with what you said earlier around the underlying technology that really harbors lots of opportunity there, and we have seen some of the the pilot projects that have been undertaken in the payments and clearing space or settlement space that shows that, look, you can compress the time of getting these transactions through, and there's lots of cost savings that may come with that. So that is certainly where I think the great opportunity lie. And as you may know, our Reserve Bank here a couple of years ago did a study in the payment system, and that a project showed that you could, with the use of DLT and similar technologies, you can actually compress the payment cycle of what it would take to settle all the payments in a national payment system that would take you normally kind of a day. You can compress that to like 1.5 hours or something. So that underlying technology, in terms of exploiting that, I think it's where the immediate or more immediate opportunities lie.
Janet, do you want to talk to us a little bit about technology within ABSA? I mean, there are some that think that perhaps an F&B or others are leading this by far. I mean, what does ABSA do in terms of technology? What do you invest in technology? Yeah, your thoughts around that.
No, financial services have, of course, been influenced by technology for the last decade or so, maybe even longer. And that's been a real push in that. So most of the players, including ABSA, would be very acutely aware of the need to keep up to speed, to keep investing in capabilities and technologies that will allow you to keep pace with the operating environment and its changes. So we similarly have been investing in these capabilities. And as I said earlier, one opportunity, for instance, that arose when we split from Barclays was also to use that opportunity also to upgrade our systems. And we have won awards with regard to some of the technological solutions that we've provided. So in that sense, and we've actually, as part of our own ambition and what we put out publicly, we say that we want to be for instance, a digitally led bank. And so technology plays a huge role, and part of what will take us into the post-COVID environment includes us investing and continuing to invest in a technology platform and chases and capabilities that will make sure that we can, at all times, not keep up with the competition, hopefully be a little bit faster than them in delivering to our customers.
Talking about fast, a question before I hand over to Anthea. She's a triathlete and runs, swims and cycles faster than most. And I'm interested to hear from our former Deputy Governor and current CEO, what do you do to get your mind to rest a little bit in your downtime?
Certainly not. I don't run and do triathlons and all of those type of things. No, I'm a hobby photographer, and that's sort of what helps me to relax every now and then. I go to the bush and take sort of wildlife photography, and that's my prime hobby. And apart from that, you try and keep up with reading, with stuff that's not related to economics, finance, and markets.
Yeah. Anthea, back to you.
So Daniel, I have one last question, one serious question before we go. I want to talk a little bit about the downgrade. So, I mean, it's fairly common practice, and I'm not sure that it's happened. I can't think of an instance where it's happened where a country gets downgraded and the banks are rated above the country's rating. And what's intriguing me a little bit about this constant downgrade that we've had of the South African government debt and South African economy is that our bonds have not really blown out, or not to the extent that we thought they would, perhaps. So I don't know where that is. And I keep trying to explain it to myself by saying that investors are looking for returns. You know, international investors really are looking for yield. And so they keep buying South African bonds, which keeps our yield and our cost of funding fairly low. Do you have a view on where or why this is?
Well, see, there are obviously a myriad of factors that tends to influence sort of financial market participants' behavior. Certainly the one that you mentioned is a fairly dominant one at the moment. We talked about it earlier in terms of the amount of stimulus and liquidity that's been put into the markets that obviously needs to kind of find a home. The low interest rate environment in advanced economies is well known, so people are looking for a pickup in that sense. But the other issue as well also has to do with the fact that in many instances, before these downgrades happen, there tends to be a process. So there are reports, there are warnings, there are changes in outlooks and those kind of issues. So to an extent, investors, as we say, price in some of these movements. And certainly as far as the South African credit is concerned, you'll recall that the talks of downgrades, and particularly when it came to us going below the investment grade threshold, had been talked about for quite a long time, which incidentally actually helped us certainly as a financial services sector and the banking sector in particular, to go in this COVID crisis relatively well prepared, because a lot of shoring up of capital and liquidity and all that, people were getting prepared for what the fallout would be from us being taken to sub-investment grade, how what sell-offs there would be, what that would do to the currency, and those kind of issues. So in a way, we were actually preparing for a different event. Obviously, we got hit by something much bigger and much worse. But yeah, there's certainly those kind of issues, that there is lots of international liquidity that's to find a home, and that to an extent, part of these downgrades may have been expected and priced into assets in the market.
Carl, do you have any questions before I close?
I do. We've got a couple, and I'll wrap up. I just want to make one comment, because you're as bad as our guest in terms of self-promotion. So as an investor that's particularly fond of ETFs, if anybody's keen, I know, because I like them, but the Absa New Gold and the Absa New Palladium are in the top 10 performing ETFs in the past year. So check those out. And then Anthea is always available at invest@cartesian.co.za, and is always keen to chat about how Cartesian can assist. And I'll ask a couple of the final questions. And I'm going to be a bit circumspect not to put our guest on the spot, who's generously given of his time. But there is a question relating to staff and your executive and leadership at Absa, and what your plans are with regards to that, Daniel. If not sure you are keen or able to answer, but around the team at Absa, are you making changes, the thoughts for the future and human capital?
Well, I guess those are kind of questions that would always arise when there is a new chief executive. So it's not unusual that people should be asking those questions. I'm certainly not somebody that feels that you need to make changes so that sort of people notice that there's a new sheriff in town for the sake of it. But clearly, where there are opportunities, and that's I think how one needs to look at it, to continue strengthening our teams, we will take advantage of that. And but there is kind of no need to do anything that would be unusual from what would be the ordinary course of business, in terms of sometimes executives leaving, others needing to be replaced. But where there are opportunities, we want to attract strong leaders that can drive our business going forward, and certainly making sure that these are the people that inspire the staff that we then would be able to attract and retain in the business.
Thank you. Anthea, before I hand over to you for the close, I just want to say on behalf of all the investors, and particularly the retail investors on this webinar and the ones who will access it afterwards on YouTube, thanks, Anthea, for putting it together. And Daniel, to have a leader of your stature willing to not only join us, but to share your wisdom, to be open to being asked whatever question is thrown at you. And just the leadership that you demonstrate makes me hugely excited, not only for you at APSA, but for the future of South Africa. So a massive thanks to you. I hope you do get some downtime over the holidays to take some good photographs and relax. And we look forward to big things from you next year. Over to you, Anthea, for our close.
Thanks,
please.
Carol. Very kind.
So I want to say the same. I have, these webinars have been very interesting. Lockdown has been interesting. Moving on to webinar instead of face-to-face meetings has been interesting. A bit exhausting, I must admit. But Carol, you and your team have made it fantastically easy. I really appreciate that. And Jess, you really have got an incredibly efficient team. And then Daniel, this is our last webinar. I was going to say last webinar, but these actually are very popular. So it might just be the last for this year, and what a way to go out. Thank you very much for your time. I know how busy you are, and for your insights. It's been hugely interesting. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much, everyone as well, for attending.
Thanks for inviting me. And I also wish all of you well. I hope you get some rest, get to recharge those batteries, and we all hope that 2021 will be rather different from the year that we are now drawing the curtain on. Let's hope for the best, and you can't live without hope. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, and make sure to follow Anthea on social media and keep a lookout for future webinars and also other events that Cartesian are organizing. Keep well, everybody. Goodbye.
Thanks very much.
Bye.